going to be speaking to the eight breaths of design. I'm going to take a breath as we start the 8 breaths. So the 8 breath model of design is process architecture. It's basically how we build the processes, the things that we do together. And process design is at the heart of the art of hosting practice. It's a very core element of it. It's special because it's one of the things that art of hosting really gave to the world. Many of the methodologies that we use, such as World Cafe or open space technology, are things that were created by different individuals. And the art of hosting is a community that kind of blends and uses the different methodologies and and creates the network around it. So one of the special things about art of hosting is the 8 breaths of design. It's this process architecture. And the reason that it's so important and it's so core to our work is because we're not just looking to go through different exercises, right? A process is not just about, or the processes that we want to hold are not just about doing different parts, but they're really about building one layer on top of another in order to flow towards the emergence, to flow towards that collective intelligence that is the heart of our work. In the early days, it was called process architecture, and then the 8 breaths of design really kind of solidifies. It's important to note that the divergence emerges and convergence. So the opening, staying there, and closing is something that art of hosting learned from Sam Kainer. Am I saying that right? Sam Kainer. I want to honor that. Okay, I'm going to assume.
That's right. That's good.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you. Great. So the process, the 8 breath of design is also about, again, not just going through the motions, but going into the purpose of a journey, going into the flow and the journey to allow whatever wants to be born. And the reason that I love this model so very much and work with it a lot is because I really believe that it touches, and we will see as we go through this model today, you will see that it touches upon a lot of the elements that are very, very core to the practice, and allows us a sort of reflection or a sort of a model, as models do, right? Of seeing where I am and where my work is and what might I add in order to make it richer. So that's a kind of like just a framing of this beautiful frame that we're going to teach. And now I shall hand over to the wonderful Mira.
Yeah, and this model, the 8 breaths, you can use it in many different contexts. You can use it no matter, it could be a meeting of an hour or even a 10-minute conversation, but it could also be a many-year-long process somehow. So you can use it in many, many different ways and in many different settings, no matter if you're doing community building or you're doing organizational development, or if you're just having an event or meeting or project. So it's really, you can use it in so many different contexts, and I think that's why, for me, that's also one of the beautiful elements of it. And also, it's not a linear model. So it's not like a timeline that you follow up. It's actually very much fractal. So it's a bit like we were speaking before about cauliflower or broccoli, so that you can find it in the small elements the same way as you can find it in the bigger picture of what you're designing. And it's really, the magic happens in the middle of the breath somehow. So you're breathing in and you're holding, and then you're breathing out. And for me, I don't know, I like to see it a little bit like diving deep, like because we're breathing every day, but there's moments where we're breathing fast, and there's moments where we're breathing a little bit slower. And maybe in a way, what we're doing is we're going a little bit under the water to discover something new. So here the purpose is somehow to innovate something, or maybe the purpose might be to really connect to something, to deeper meaning, to discover something new, or to really build a sense of community and co-ownership in the process. And that's why this inner piece, the middle piece, is so important, which we call the grown zone or the growth zone, where we're really letting go of what we know and opening up this door of the possibility to discover something new. And that's a little bit also, for me, the exciting part about it, is to go into this place where none of us really knows what's happening, but where we're just having a little glimpse to invite in the newness and the connectedness for all of us. And so it all starts with a starting point. It's a bit like a spark, something that sparks the conversation, which can mean many different things. And it's usually some sort of opportunity or a disturbance that's happening and that we need to attend to, or maybe a question that's just really worth exploring right now. So that's the overall starting point. And you can see that around this bigger breath inside, you can see many different smaller breaths, so 7 small breaths, and the 8, which is like the bigger breath. And the first one, it's called the call. And the call is really about, it's actually more a personal practice. So we're having this idea in Art of Hosting of the caller, the call that's coming from a community or emerging somewhere. And it's really this practice of clarifying what is really the need. And it's really taking that time of inflection, of understanding of what's really happening and where is this really coming from? What am I really seeing? What's really the need for the person as a caller, or the need of the community that we're dealing with, or the stakeholders that we're dealing with. And it's also about understanding a bit, how is this call really lying in the context? So really to understand the underlying, the context around it. We have this practice in Art of Hosting where we really honor the caller and honor the roots of where something's coming from. So it's really also kind of giving space to the history of how a conversation has emerged, because you might be coming in at a later stage. So it's really important to understand where are the roots of all of this. I'm not sure if you want to add something, Maya.
Yes, Mira, if you can stop sharing for a second, I'd like to share a different design, an added element, if possible. Thank you very much. Yes. So this is, as Mira spoke, the divergence, emergence, and the convergence. And I'm going to give a very simple example. And as I do so, as me and Mira speak this beautiful model to you, I invite you guys to write questions if they come up in the chat, so we can both harvest them and also that we can relate to them if we can, to make the learning more rich. And so a nice simple example for a need, a disturbance, or possibility that can set us off, that can be the spark, is we're going to use the example of garbage collection. So I imagine me living in a city, and in my neighborhood, there's irregular garbage collection. It's like a small problem, but it's a disturbance, and it's something that I feel that needs to be addressed. And so I feel a call. I feel a calling to do something in my neighborhood around sanitation, right? Very, very simple, small community thing. And what can happen from that, if I'm the caller, if we're moving into the first breath of the 8 breaths, the call, is asking myself and working with myself. In the call, the first breath invites me to really understand, what is my calling? Like, what am I being called to? Why am I being called to it? So I might want to journal about it. I might want to speak to people about it. But the invitation of the first breath is really to understand the purpose that is setting me off on this mission. And so in our example, I will have really thought about it, understood what's happening there, and decided that for me, getting the neighborhood connected around something that it's a shared interest, like sanitation, is very important. And that is my call. It's become more understandable to me, and I'm ready to move to the next phase. Mira.
Yeah, the next phase is to clarify. And here's really about opening. So we're in the phase of divergence, of exploring a bit more the underlying issue. And in many contexts, we tend to jump this point of clarifying. So we tend to move directly towards action or directly into the design of things. And what we're trying to do is really to hold back one little moment to look a little bit deeper rather than moving directly towards action, because it's an important point to really have a common and shared understanding of what are we really dealing with. So this is really about the core team as well, about bringing together the team that you will be looking together at this issue with and holding this together, and to really clarify, so what is the context that we are now operating and dealing with? What is the setting? What are the conditions? Who are really the people that need to be involved in that, and what's the role? So it's really understanding the wider context, but also understanding the boundaries of it. So what's not part of this? So really to be able to give a really clear framing, to be able to be clear, it's really important to understand what are really the conditions that we want to operate in, and what are not the conditions.
So in our example, I set out on my sanitation mission. That was my call. And then opening up a little, I started speaking to people and found some neighbors that actually really were also thinking about the sanitation element. And so as we're opening, a small core team began to emerge and gathering together. And then doing the work of clarifying, which Mira spoke to, we start seeing how we're actually motivated from different things. There are different interests in play. And that's fine. That is absolutely okay. But what we found out, what we can find out when we do the clarifying work here, is that maybe I'm into this because my calling is to have regular and very, very good sanitation services. Another person, my next door neighbor that also might join the core team, is interested in this call because he's really into the environment and he wants composting happening much more. So that's his interest. And then a third person that would join the team will be there because they want to run in the next local elections and they're interested in doing something against the council, right? So they're in for a political reason. Now, here is an example of 3 different interests, 3 different callings that all brought us wanting to do something around our community and the situation with sanitation. And so finding those things ahead of time are super, super powerful. Many, many times what happens is we come together and we assume that we're all here for the same cause. Because it's so important for me, it must be really important for you. But then what might happen is a few months down the line, my environmental friend will have a new environmental venture and they'll expect me to be a part of it because, of course, this is why we did the sanitation project. And that might create conflict and rift. So the more we can discuss and the more we can clarify our callings, not only in the sense of what we agree on, but also what do we not agree on, the more chance we have of having a coherent process and being more aligned and understanding the purpose that we are working on together and the different things where we are not aligned and not going to work on together. Mira.
Yeah, and the next part is to invite. And invitation is also, could be seen as an art in itself. Here it's really about understanding like whom you're inviting really determines what's going to happen, and how you invite determines who's going to show up, and it's also going to determine how are people going to show up, with what expectations and with what level of openness to really contribute. One element that you would probably be surprised how long we work on is the invitation questions. We were speaking about it this morning also with Maya, that we spend quite a lot of time on thinking what kind of question would really gives us a sense of the essence of what we are wanting to have a conversation about. What kind of questions really like crafted in a way so that it doesn't only invite to the conversation, but it also gives people a sense of how the experience will be like, and how the whole process will be kind of what to expect, basically. And So it's also about inviting in diversity. So we would love different people with different mindsets from different bubbles to come, so that we have this level of diversity in the room, of perspectives, so that we can really get somewhere new and have the necessary tension between the different viewpoints to be able to reach the depth of the conversation that we would like to reach. And so it's also important to look at whom are we not seeing. So when we're having the conversation about the invite, to think about different people that we would like to invite. And it's not so much about having a representation of people, but it's really about having the different perspectives in the room that are really needed to bring this forward, and having those that are needed to bring the level of diversity that we would really like to have in order to have the conversation really truly and fully and authentically with people. And maybe then there's also this element important that that the tone that we put to an invitation, it really determines how people feel about them being invited. Because in many contexts, people are not used to really being asked for their opinion. They're more used to a certain structure that they're kind of being put into. It's not so common for many people to be asked for their voice. And so it's really important that we give it like the sensitiveness that it needs, so that people feel really invited into the space and have the courage and feel safe and clear around how they can speak up and how they can contribute.
Yeah, so continuing the invite is also about it's inviting people into a different space, also in the sense of you're not just coming to be an audience. You're not just coming to consume a lecture or some sort of show that we're going to put on for you. It's to set the quality in advance that your voice matters. We want people to look at the calling question that we have crafted and say to themselves, that is a conversation that I want to be in. I have an opinion. I actually have thoughts on that. That is the kind of energy, that is the kind of thing we want to bring people in with. And in our example, in our beautiful garbage example, what the core team might decide there is wanting to invite people to a World Cafe, the neighborhood, people in the neighborhood, just to start feeling out, just to start understanding what people think about it and how they want to deal with it. And so invitation also has many different faces, and you can invite in many different ways, just like you can harvest in many different ways. And in fact, the invitation piece and the harvest piece are mirrors of each other, in the sense that when we think of the invitation, when we think of the calling question, we want to be thinking of what do we want to harvest out of our meeting, of our process, of when people come together. And so in our example of the neighborhood, we can invite in a WhatsApp group, just to kind of name the many, many things, right? We can invite in a WhatsApp group. We can make posters and hang them up in the neighborhood. We can make personal phone calls to people who we know are involved in the neighborhood and are into it and are interested. We can, hand out flyers. We can go on local radio. Like, there are many, many ways to invite, and I really encourage you guys to be very creative about it. And as Mira spoke to, who do we want to be there? In order to bring in a big variety, it's also very helpful to think about different ways of invitation and who they might meet.
Yeah, the next step is to meet. And as you find, this is fractal, right? So you will be able to find all of those steps inside of each of the, or all of the breaths, and inside of each of the breaths. But to me, it's really about choosing the elements that make sense in the moment of the actual gathering, or the actual come together. There might be many gatherings as well in your design. And it's in a way also it's not so much about choosing the right methods, but it's really about choosing what works in this particular context. And you might notice from the things that we have used so far that there are some elements that make sense in one moment of the meeting or the gathering, and other elements that make more sense in another moment. So generally you would always have a moment where you're kind of checking in, getting to know each other and exploring together. you would always have a moment somewhere where you're trying to get more into depth. So it's really following the breath in a way. And you will have a moment where you're trying to converge. That might be in one meeting or in many meetings. What's really important here is it's not just about the methods, or it's not just about the process of the exercises that you're doing. It's really about the experience. So it's about putting ourselves into the shoes of the participants and to think about, okay, if I arrive, what's the context I'm arriving to, and what's the space going to be like? How are people going to feel? Where they're going to eat, and how they're going to meet each other? How will the air feel like in the moment that I'm entering this kind of space with these kind of people there? So it's really about imagining this in a way that helps us then to really design it as an experience rather than designing it just as a method or an agenda to follow.
And so in our example, we had a world cafe inviting the neighborhood. Many people showed up. There were different conversations. And many different ideas came up. Nobody was really feeling like they want to apply anything immediately. There wasn't any major, like, we need to do this. There were some voices saying, let's do more of the environmental things, some saying, let's protest. But then there was a general like pattern coming up of like, can we try and be more regular in how we work with the garbage system? Do we know what day it's coming, and can we make sure that we put the bins out ahead of time? There was sort of a call coming out for people in the neighborhood to kind of self-organize to be more ordered, and then also another line saying we want to get more in touch with the people in charge of this. And these are some possible outcomes, but the main thing that can happen in this meet is that people met each other, and many different things could come out of it that we didn't even expect. Mira.
Yeah, and then the next breath is to harvest. And it's actually, I mean, it's not actually called the art of hosting. It's also we call it the art of hosting and harvesting conversations that matter, because they really go like yin and yang together, hosting and harvesting. Many times it's the part that we don't really see much, or we don't really look at much before the actual meeting, but it's what stays with people. So it's really about gathering kind of the fruits of the conversation, the essence of the conversations. And there's so many different ways of gathering, because there's so many different fruits that are coming out. It's not just about the tangible parts, it's also about the intangible parts. And there's a whole variety of ways, creative, more creative, less creative ways of gathering those outcomes and the fruits, the relationships even that are created all together. That it's a whole other world basically, and they very closely go together. So it's not first meeting and then harvesting. It's really something that we plan from the beginning, and we imagine together in a way that flows with each other, and that we really trying to set beforehand so that there is really space, and also to capture all the learnings and everything that comes out, and the richness of the conversation that we are having.
And then in our make-believe example, the harvest of the World Cafe can be, wanting to open a WhatsApp group to self-organize, and then one person wanting, picking up on different voices and wanting to email the municipality about it. And then different things of like a garden that wants to, a community garden that wants to happen, and like different things that we didn't even expect that are also fruits of this meeting and can be harvested out.
Yeah, and the next step, well, actually, this is where we end, like going out of the grown zone or the growth zone. So we were first diverging, right, to exploring together. When we were exploring what is the need, the call that was happening, and then we were clarifying together the call more in the team setting, not just in the individual setting, but in the team setting. And then we moved into the emergence, the grown zone, a growth zone, where we were inviting, we were meeting, and also harvesting. And so now we are entering the convergence zone, where we are actually trying to bring things together. And the next part here would be to act, or basically to invite in, making things happen, and implementation in a way as well. So here there's some elements that are quite important. One of them for me and the projects I've been working with is really timing. So it's about finding the right time. When is the time to actually move towards convergence? And what I'm noticing is that in the moment that I invite people to take action or to implement and step in, that if we are not sufficiently down the line and we haven't have the right amount or the amount of depth that's needed, that people might be reluctant or resistant to step in and to take action. Also, when I'm not clear about things and what I'm actually inviting to, also then there might be some reluctance to it. So those are two different elements that for me are quite important, and that I'm trying to really put a lot of care in of how am I really inviting people in, and what setting am I inviting people in. So really to give people the best possible opportunity to step in. And the other element is also that whenever I'm inviting into action, that I'm trying to really honor what people's contributions are, and really it's not just something. It takes really courage to step up and say, I'm going to do this in an environment of a group that might be having a certain level of maybe challenges as well in the environment. So for me, it's quite important to honor people's contributions, and it's a way also to give more space for more. What you focus on, that's what grows, right? You said earlier. So it's really about inviting people in, and at the same time giving them the standing that they really need for the contributions, and honoring that. And sometimes new processes can emerge here as well. So it can be the beginning of something new.
And so in our example, the act that came out of the meet is the planting of a community garden, which is a really wonderful emergence of something that was not intended, but something that happened. Another act can be opening the WhatsApp group to find each other and work on this together, and someone actually taking it upon themselves to write the email and send the email to municipality, and so get different ways going. Deborah, Shira, others were seeing the questions. At the end, we're going to take a few minutes to answer some of them. So we're definitely seeing this, and thank you for them. And Mira, back to you.
Yeah, the last breath of the 7 breaths is to reflect. And this is also something that I come from an organizational environment where often it's jumped. You jump the part of reflecting, but it's actually the most important, because it's about digesting what actually happened. It's about bringing in the learning, acknowledging the learning that happened, and understanding also the deeper meaning and the deeper patterns that are going on. So it's bringing another layer of consciousness to what we've been experiencing as a conversation. It's just a digestion phase that helps us to really feed what we've been experiencing back into the wider picture of things, and doing that in a conscious way.
And in our example, the reflection piece was wonderful. The core team met. They were really pleased because no one even imagined that there was going to be a community garden that was going to be born out of it. They reflected about how things emerged and about the way they worked together, really loving the fact that they did a lot of clarifying and made the question together. There was also a bit of this kind of celebrating and tapping themselves on the back, saying, yay, us. That's also, celebration can also be a nice little part of reflection. Mira.
Yeah, and the 8th breath is the breath of holding the whole. And we were speaking this morning also with Maya a bit about what's really the essence of it. And we came to this idea of tending to the ripples. So that ripples are like when you throw a stone into the water, it's like the little waves that start going out, and you cannot always influence the ripples, probably never can fully influence the ripples that are created, and it's really putting your attention to those ripples and intending to them in a way that is needed, because there might be some sensitive issues that are being triggered. There might be some things happening underneath or on the side of what you're actually trying to work and put your energy in. And those are all very important to be tending to really give a whole, bring in the wholeness of the experience, and also to feed things back. So there can be many elements to it, but it's really about just having that layer of consciousness throughout the whole process, of really holding things together and also holding in with your team, not doing it on your own, but really holding as a team the whole throughout each and every step of what you're achieving and what you're attending to.
In our example, a person that stepped into the core team, one of the people that started this process, the garbage community project, might have left after a meeting or two. And so holding the whole might be reaching out to that person, letting them know what has happened, and just kind of seeing if everything's cool, if there's a reason they left. That might be an unintended consequence of our work that we might want to tend to. And the meet might have happened right in a space where next to someone's, we were making noise, right? The meeting was making noise next to someone's house. And so reaching out to that person a day later with a nice potted plant and saying, we know that you actually suffered some discomfort because of our process. So just to say, like, we see that and we apologize and thank you for allowing for this to happen. So it's the sensitivity to feel the things that we might be influencing without really knowing it, and holding the whole, both in the sense of the team process, the participants, but then also maybe other elements that we didn't anticipate and didn't see.
Yeah, and then in the end you get to outcomes, but not only to outcomes, you also get to building relationships and community. And I think that's one of the elements that is often less seen, but it's really the powerful part of tending to such a process and really putting that of our practice. Actually, it's the really underlying value that will also ensure the sustainability of whatever we are implementing. So it's this invisible other layer that is actually the essence. It's a bit like the mushrooms that are connecting the trees under the soil, and that helps really for communication and for us to stay connected with each other. That will maybe not only support in the implementation of a project, but maybe also to spark other projects and to help to really build a community between people.